Så där ja. Kom in och slå ner. Vi börjar alldeles strax. And then I'll change to my not native language because this is a seminar in English and you will soon understand why. So I welcome all of you to the blue light tent, but I think we should in English call it the first responders tent instead. Which, in addition to being the Gotland temporary fire station down here, it is also a collaboration between Gotland Fire and Rescue Service, SOS Alarm, the National Association of Ambulance Nurses, and the Greater Stockholm Fire Brigade. We are very happy to see you all coming here today, and I hope that we will do our best to give you a good and interesting seminar. My name is Svante Borg, and I'm the director of Greater Stockholm Fire Brigade. But today I will act as a moderator and will lead us all through this seminar. In addition to all of you that are now here, sitting and watching me, I also welcome all of you that are following us online in real time on the internet, and of course later on, because we will there will be a possibility to see this seminar even later. Our seminars, plus much more, can be found at www.storstockholm.brand.se. Today's seminar is the fourth in a row of 5, and here in this tent, the first responders tent. During the week, we have been talking and will talk about various topics: emergency preparedness, civil defense, about management of large forest fires that we will hear of today, and about the knowledge that makes difference between life and death. Occasionally, during the week, we will put things a little bit more on the edge by giving people the call, go into the basket or into the cage. And we will put them in the cage in our ladder, and we will rise the ladder to an appropriate height, and we will start asking people questions. And the only way to get down is to provide clear and straightforward answers, no political answers, to the questions that is asked. This is, you know, the place in the basket. Yeah, it's plats i korgen. It's a typical Swedish idiomatic expression. In English, it's get into the doghouse, get into the doghouse, which may be for some of us will be more recognized as an expression used by our partners when we have not been acting that appropriate. But today's seminar will be about tracing climate change. What can Sweden learn from California about managing wildfire? In California, a number of very large wildfires occurs every year. The fire authorities are faced with the seeming impossible task of dealing with these fire catastrophes. How do they prevail? What can Sweden and Swedish actors learn from California? Climate conditions with extreme drought and strong wind contribute to the extensive wildfires that annually affect California. Assisted by a developed warning system, the fire authorities in California can limit the extent of many of these fires. When ignition occurs in areas with poor access and under unfavorable weather conditions, fires can rapidly increase to unmanageable size prior to the fire source arrival. Huge areas are burning every year, and tens of thousands of people are forced to flee their homes. The numbers of dead and missing in the year of 2018 was approximately around 100 dead people and many thousands of injured people. What is burning? Why does it burn? And what can be done to manage these fires? This is a panelist discussion on what Sweden can learn from California about managing wildfires. The participants today are Jonathan Cox, Department of Forestry and Fire Protection in California. It's Jakob Wernerman from Swedish Civil Contingency Agency. Johan Sonesson from Forestry Research Institute of Sweden, and Peter Arnevall from the Greater Stockholm Fire Brigade. So, with this, I will let Jonathan take the scene. He is a division chief in the Department of Forestry and Fire Protection in an organization called CAL FIRE. Johan, you will give us an introduction to the subject, so please, go ahead.
Thank you, Svante, and thanks for everybody for being here. As he said, my name is Jonathan Cox. I'm a division chief with CAL FIRE. CAL FIRE is the state firefighting organization in California, and we are responsible for responding to about 500,000 calls for service a year, about 550,000 calls for service across the state, with about 8,000 employees, 5,000 permanent, 3,000 seasonal. And we have approximately 800 fire stations, 900 engines, and a whole host of other programs. What I'm really here to talk about today is what we've faced over the past few years, the past 2-3 years, in relation to fire and the problems that we're experiencing. Just to start things off, I was going to set the scene for you and set the tone, just to get us in the mindset of what we're facing. Just take a quick minute to watch this car fire, and then we can discuss kind of what's going on in our state.
This fire is making a significant push into the northwestern portion of Reading. The fire community is extremely heartbroken. As we mourn the loss, we also battle a fire that is moving extremely quickly and erratically into western Reading.
A lot of people working the fire lines today who have either lost homes, have family members who have lost homes, or certainly have been evacuated. And just some Herculean efforts overnight between law enforcement, firefighters, and many others to pull people from harm's way. 2018, it's really off to the same difficult, challenging firefight that we've seen in 2017, and before that, 2016. The last 5 or 6 years in California, we've been experiencing the effects of our long-standing drought. Right now, we're averaging about 45 to 50 fires a day.
This is part of a trend, a new normal that we got to deal with, and we're dealing with it humanly, financially, and governmentally. We got a lot to do right now to get over this momentary crisis. It's not just here in Reading, it's in other parts of the state. Tragedy brings us closer together, but out of that, we learn to depend on each other and work together.
The car fire, which was shown on the video, is a fire that came through Northern California of July of this last year. And the most important kind of thing to recognize from all this and the takeaway is what happened on this fire. It burned in the middle of July, and it created an F3 tornado, something we've never seen in the United States before. An F3 tornado is about 140 mile-an-hour winds. You see it in the Midwest usually. We've never seen it in California on a fire, and we experienced it this year as a fire came into a inhabited area or community. That piece of metal right there is a metal rod that was bent around a post because of the winds that occurred. A lot of people have referred to it as a fire-nado. It's not a sharknado, but fire-nado. And unfortunately, it killed people. It killed 2 firefighters, it killed a number of civilians, and it destroyed several hundred homes. And this is really just kind of to start things off by saying what we're seeing in the new normal in California is something that we've never experienced in the past 100 years. The fire behavior, the way fires are burning, and the way that they are impacting people are pretty stark. So just to put it in context, last year alone, 2018, we had about 7,500 fires in California, 1.8 million acres of land that burned, and about 22,000 structures that were destroyed. And 22,000 structures, those are predominantly homes that were destroyed in the state. And for a state that has a big housing crisis at the moment, that's a lot of structures to lose in just a few months. Now, what does it mean for us as firefighters? The actual numbers are pretty stark. 236,000 personnel responded to wildfires. Obviously, the impact of this is felt on the firefighters themselves. 22,000 fire engines and 9,000 helicopters that had to respond. The biggest takeaway of all that is just the cost of what it's impacting California on. In 2017, we spent about $700 million on fire suppression just for the emergencies themselves. Last year, 2018, we spent over $900 million, approaching $1 billion on fire suppression outside of our normal budgets. So the impact of all of this is big, not only to firefighters, but to the government as well. So the question we always get is, why is this getting so bad? Why are things so bad in California at the moment? And I think the big high-level first point of notability is the fact that we are experiencing climate change kind of on the daily basis on the job in California. And the first thing to look at with that is the weather itself. And this is what we refer to a lot of time when we think about climate change. But one thing we've noticed is the last 5 years in California have been the hottest on record, year over year. There's a lot of debate about that, but the 5 years that we've seen have been the most warm. The thing that really is important on that is the nighttime temperatures for us. We've noticed a big increase in nighttime temperatures in California, and as firefighters, that has a big impact on us because what we used to traditionally use as a moment to fight some fires at night or to make good containment lines, we don't have that opportunity as much anymore in California at night. Our fuels are not getting as moist as they used to in the nighttime hours, and so the fire behavior that we're seeing during the day is being exacerbated because of these warm temperatures at night. Along with the weather is something called the drought, and we're seeing these big fluctuations in weather patterns in California at the moment. We saw about a 5-year drought, a significant drought that occurred, followed by the last 2 years of significant rainfall, kind of over and above the average. So we're seeing these massive swings, more and more predominant in California, which has an impact on us. This was last year, October of last year. This is the drought monitor. This was 5 years of drought. What we're experiencing right now is all the materials that died for the last 5 years are actually sitting on the ground now across the state. So even though we have rain that's occurred, we still have the fuel on the ground, which is causing a lot of fire behavior to increase across the state. And I'll go back to kind of hit one more thing on this. One thing that does get overlooked a lot is we're seeing another increase in the amount of offshore winds we get. All these big fires you see in the media, the one underlying consistent norm amongst all of it is the offshore winds. And when I say offshore, it's winds that blow from kind of the Nevada, Oregon area offshore of California. And those are the winds that really push these fires that predominantly happen in the fall, in the autumn time, sometimes into October and November. The other thing that's happening with climate change in California is the actual vegetation itself is changing. The kind of the composition and the way that the vegetation is growing and the types of vegetations that we have are changing. If you look at this map right here, any guesses? We have a dying tree problem in California, and anyone who can get the number gets a prize. We have 129 dead or dying trees in the state right now. Sorry, 129 million dead or dying trees in the state. It's not a problem if it's 129. 129 million dead or dying trees in the state. And this is a result of the temperatures that we've seen, the fluctuations, but also some of our forest management practices and a lot of kind of impacts coming together. The problem is a lot of these dead and dying trees are in communities, along roadways, in areas that when they burn have a big impact on being able to get people out because we can't put them out fast enough. So you're starting to see the slides line up as to why the problem's occurring in California. The first aspect of it is the weather. The second one is actually the vegetation itself. And the third one of this climate change impact on the state is the actual fire season itself. So you hear of this term fire season in California, and that's really just the time of the year that we experience the most fires in the state. Traditionally, and I'll use this graph as a great example, the green bars indicate before 2000, 1984 to 2000, when we experienced the most fires in California. So that was the 18 years prior to 2000 was our traditional fire season. If you look now at the acres we're burning since 2001, you see these red bars, and it's almost double in a lot of cases the amount of acreage we're burning every month across the state. And you're also noticing that, you know, this used to be the traditional fire season, but you're noticing that start to push out further and further into the November and December months, and why, you know, we're really referring to the new normal as being a year-round fire problem in California. It's not something that's just happening during the summer times. It's happening kind of year over year, month over month, at an increasing level. Okay, so that's if I had to contextualize all of the climate change problem that we have. There's a lot more aspects to climate change, but that's what we're experiencing on the ground in California. It's the weather, it's the vegetation, it's the length of fire season coming together. But that's not the complete picture. That's the high-level talking point about climate change. The other compounding fact to this is humans, and especially in California over the past 100 years. And there's a big human impact here that we also need to focus on, because we as humans have had a big impact in California over the last 100 years that, in combination with climate change, have really led to these disasters being as bad as they are. The first one is fire suppression. And when I talk about fire suppression, I mean we keep our fires small, right? We sign up as firefighters and we want to keep the fires small. That's what we're paid to do, which is great. It protects homes. It stops the fires from burning. The flip side of that is we are interrupting the natural cycle of the regime, right? The land wants to burn. On average, in the last prior 100 years, every 30 to 50 years, the land would burn. We'd call it the fire regime, and it's the natural climate that the state of California is in. The problem now is that humans come in and we've started to suppress these fires. The result is we have a lot of buildup in a lot of areas of the state that would have otherwise naturally burned and had that natural cycle occur. So that is another factor that we're contending with. In addition to that is the population growth. California is now at 40 million people just within the state itself. So we're a massively populated state, and we don't live in the areas that are easy to develop, right? We live in the areas that are really hard to develop now. We live in the mountainous communities. We live along the areas that otherwise would have burned that we've stopped fires in. We now put people there, and we now put structures there. So of the past 100 years, it's only been the last 10 years that we've actually had regulations that look at how you build and live in areas when you look at wildland fires, so the materials that we use. So we have a lot of homes that are very susceptible to burning in a lot of bad areas in California. And on top of that, we have climate change, which is making those impacts more frequent and more intense. So you can see the problem kind of inflating itself as you look at all this together. And the last thing is infrastructure. The 40 million people, as they've grown in California, have come in and built out the state in ways that was not a kind of a master plan. So areas that used to be cabins or summer homes have now turned into full-time residents and communities, right? And the road network that was built to use these places part-time is now a full-time dependency for the infrastructure. We've lived in places where there may not be adequate water supplies, and we've been using wells that are no longer working, or public infrastructure that is now kind of legacy infrastructure that has problems. So those are the human impacts of it. So I like to use this whole equation about what's going on is we have the climate change, and then we have the human impacts of it all. And that kind of results in what we call the new normal. So the new normal in California, when we put all these problems into context, we're seeing more fires, we're seeing more destruction, and we're seeing them more frequently, is the bottom line in the state right now. Over the last 100 years, half of the most deadly and destructive fires have occurred within the last 10 years. So that's a pretty stark number. Even in my career, starting 20 years ago, I've seen a dramatic increase year over year on the number of structures and the number of fires we're responding to. So I'm going to take another big risk on a video and try to put some of these issues into context with some examples that we've seen. So fingers crossed.
All units, Sonoma Lake Napa, multiple starts in the unit, stand by for fire assignment. For engine 1487, utility 1468, engine 1463, engine 5763, engine 1471, engine 1481, engine 19, station 15, transport 1447, 1443, Canocti 4, Canocti 3, vegetation fire, City of Calistoga. Highway 128 cross the Tubbs Lane. Tubbs IC. Stand by for response check back. 2146. All units, Snow Lake Napa unit. You have 2 major fires going in the unit. One on Atlas Peak, one in Calistoga, 128 across the Tubbs Lane. As you come into Napa County, come up, and I'll give you an assignment.
Engine 419. Can I have the IC designator for the Calistoga incident?
Engine 419 IC designator is going to be Tubbs. Tactical is LNU East. Correction, tactical is V-Fire 25. Command local East.
Copy, Tubbs IC. We do have, at this point, at least one. Stanley, engine 1470-75. Stanley, engine 419. One structure involved this time. Stanley, battalion 1414 on East 6.
Battalion 1414, Stanley.
Command, I'll assume command shortly. We do have a major fire. Stand by for a very significant resource request.
Are you there? Battalion 1414, Stanley, copy.
Tubbs IC, basically, we're going to utilize fire history and these winds and low resources. We're going to evacuate all the way from Calistoga to Santa Rosa and all adjoining roads. Make sure we get people out of harm's way. Check and go tactics, #1 priority for tonight. Get people out of harm's way.
Stanley, copy. Evacuating from Calistoga to Santa Rosa.
And utility 1474, Tubbs IC, go ahead. Update on the fire. We just came out of Mountain Home Ranch Road. The fires came through there. We're heading towards Porter Creek, and we were told to jump Porter Creek. I copy. You'll be a branch 3, division 1405, utilizing CTAC 12. You can contact him. We have evacuated all the areas between Calistoga and Santa Rosa. So if you can assist and make sure that the evacuation continue.
So that was the Tubbs fire north of Santa Rosa. You probably heard the wine country fires a couple years ago. For context, the initial scene when you're seeing the driving is actually my vehicle as we're coming into the incident that night. And then you hear the dispatch of all the resources going on. You probably also noticed the wind, right? That was a big factor in there. And I keep coming back to the wind because that's this common denominator that we're seeing over all these fires. And that fire burned at a rate of speed of about a 1 football field or about an acre per minute is the rate of speed that we were seeing that fire burn from Calistoga towards Santa Rosa. The unfortunate reality is that was the result. That fire did that destruction probably within the first 8 hours of burning, right? Trying to move 30,000 people out of the path of a fire. You know, we had stories from firefighters who were literally running down the street from their homes trying to run away from the fire. So this is the kind of the reality of it. And we'll look at some reasons, kind of why some factors from climate change and the human impact were involved. On the left here, you see the map of all the structures that were destroyed. This is the city of Santa Rosa, about, I don't know, 40 minutes north of San Francisco. And the fire came from Calistoga and pushed over a mountain range into the city of Santa Rosa. Wind gusts were recorded at over 70 miles an hour. The interesting thing about this is that this fire burned in the exact same footprint as a fire of 1964 called the Hanley Fire. The Hanley Fire only destroyed less than 100 cabins. And it took 4.5 days what it took this fire 4.5 hours to do, right? So it's a really good example of, A, the climactic change we're finding with the rate of spreads that fire are burning, and B, what happens when you put people living in those areas and the human impact of them, why this new normal is so powerful at the moment in the state of California. On the right is Paul Lowenthal, one of my good buddies. He was in that vehicle in front of me that we saw as we were arriving there. That's him standing at his home. Obviously this has a big impact on firefighters as well, right? We live in these areas and we're losing our homes as well. So this is not just theoretical for us anymore. This is kind of we're living it as well. All right, so that was one example of what's going on with the two. We'll look at one more.
Initially, I don't think any of us expected the outcome that came out that day.
I mean, it was non-survivable at points from the heat.
Then we got shelters deployed and multiple vehicles burning all around us.
We all realized that we had some trouble on our hands.
Multiple vehicles on fire with also almost every structure around us was fully involved.
I fully expected, giving those orders, that we were putting firefighters in jeopardy.
Where's the road go? Oncoming. Yeah.
People were asked us straight up, am I going to die today? And I said, we will not let you die today. And they didn't, so.
They knew the magnitude of the situation and the severity, and they all went up there into the fire and did a miraculous job.
So this was the campfire. Ironically, I saw Svante last year in October, even before this occurred, and we were having this conversation about how bad things had gotten in California, and this was literally a few weeks after we had spoken about it. And this kind of sets the bar and really is the worst example of this new normal coming across. This is about 3 hours north of San Francisco, north of our capital called Sacramento. It's a town called Paradise in the Sierras, the western Sierras in Northern California. And the campfire broke out at about 6:30 in the morning. It ended up being the 16th largest fire in California, so not the largest, but by far the most destructive and the deadliest. One thing to note on the campfire was the rate of spread, and I'll just look at this when we talk about climate change and the way that winds are burning. This right here is where the fire started, and you see it progressing right now, and it's really hard to see, but there's a timer down here. But that's at 9 a.m. This is the city of Paradise right here. That's 10 a.m., 11 a.m., 12 noon, 1 p.m., 2 p.m., 3, 4, 5, and we'll go to about 6:30 right now. This is Highway 99. It's about, 16 miles from the actual city of Paradise itself. And that fire had done more destruction in that amount of time than we've ever seen in California before. 100-mile-an-hour plus winds that came into contact with a city called the City of Paradise right there. And this is really that convergence of a city and a community that was built prior to the wildland fire codes predominantly, in an area that had terrible infrastructure as far as roads, 2 ways in, 2 ways out of the City of Paradise, both of which didn't have the capacity to get 30,000 people on the road, being fueled by this climactic change of offshore wind events at the end of November on the extended fire season in vegetation that hasn't burned in a long period of time. So this is the reality that we're seeing with the new norms. And the final photo from the campfire, this was taken from space. This is one of the satellite photos taken about that same time that it got down to Highway 99. It doesn't look that bad until you look at the map and you see it, that right there is the city of Chico of about 100,000 people. And that's what we were contending with up there. So what does this mean for us as firefighters in California? A few things that we've noticed over the past couple years. First of all, firefighting for us on these events is not an effective tactic or strategy. Literally what we're doing is we're using the command system for a mass casualty incident to literally get as many people out of the path of the fire itself. We're looking at having larger, bigger command teams deployed more often across the state, and we're having to initiate evacuation orders earlier than ever and over larger periods and areas than we ever had to in the past as well. One thing to note, we talked about this, kind of longer deployments for our firefighters. It's not uncommon right now for our firefighters to work 20, 40, 50 days straight in the summertime because of these fires. And a lot of extreme fire behavior. The fires that we saw in the past are behaving differently than the fires that we actually see right now. Finally, kind of when we talk about the human aspect of it, one thing we're noticing is we have to really take into consideration the traffic impacts of evacuating this many people. We noticed, especially on the campfire, there were some really detrimental choke points as far as where traffic got congested. And really, the most important part of all of this is the most vulnerable populations in California are the ones who are either dying or getting injured. And that's our elderly population, that's our population who can't easily move or get around, and our disabled population. So that's probably the biggest concern for us at the moment, is it's our most vulnerable population that is really bearing the brunt of the front line of climate change in the state. So the question always arises, what are we doing about it? What does California kind of have, what's our plan moving forward? There's a lot going on. The unfortunate reality of what the position we're in is there's no silver bullet, as we call it. There's no one solution that's going to get us out of this problem. We have gotten into this new normal over the past 100 years. It's going to take us decades to get out of this situation, and it's going to take a lot of different angles and approaches to actually deal with it. I'll give you a few examples. One is vegetation management. We're doing a lot around the state to actually reduce the fuel load where fire would have otherwise naturally done it in the state. That's a big area of focus, especially for our new governor. Obviously, more fire engines are being deployed throughout the state with more firefighters. We're also doing defensible space inspections at home. So we send firefighters to everybody's home to actually walk around the perimeter of the property and tell them whether they have adequate clearance from the vegetation. We're also updating our maps to really identify the most vulnerable parts of the state, which then tell us where and how we can build in those areas. And we're also investing a lot of money, millions of dollars, back to the local communities to make sure that the local emergency response teams in a neighborhood have the training, have the equipment, have the tools that they need to get out when that disaster occurs, to really get kind of down in the weeds, was what we call dealing with the problem, as well as at a much higher level. So to kind of put it in a list format, those are some of the ones I talked about up here. There's also 4 other areas of focus for us, and that's policy at a very high level. These fires have really come to the surface in the political arena in California and really led to some big policy decisions being made, which is vitally important. As well as prevention. We now in California have to adapt to power companies turning off the power to entire communities because the fire threat is so high. We call it public safety power shutdowns. If the fire threat, if the offshore winds are going and the temperatures are up, they're shutting down power to those communities, so there's no risk of those power lines actually starting fires. One thing to note is a couple of these fires in California were sparked by utility lines, power lines. Our largest power company in California, who is a Fortune 500 company, as a result has filed bankruptcy. So this climate change and fire problem is having economic realities in the state as well right now. Finally, education and communication with the public. We're really taking that approach that, fending for yourself in these emergencies is vitally important, and having a plan to get out is something that's the responsibility of everyone who lives in these areas. And then at the end, we're trying to do as much as we can in a very rapid amount of time to research and document why homes are burning. Are there themes? Are there areas that are more susceptible than others? And doing the research necessary. And just a final note, it always comes up, we're in California, we're in the home of innovation and technology. There are a lot of new technologies coming out that we're excited about and innovations. One of them we're working on right now, being in the Bay Area, is something called an evacuation decision support tool. One of the hardest things for our incident commanders is knowing how and where they should evacuate during these wildland fires. And we're working on a tool that actually takes in all the data as far as topography, weather, fire behavior, location, and can actually give the incident commanders a suggestion about 1 hour, 3 hour, and 5 hour evacuation zones. So we're trying to pull in some technology. We know that's not the silver bullet, but it's one additional tool that we're going to have. And just looking forward from now, I wish I could say things are going to look better for us. The latest research that we've run with one of our universities is historically, this is acres burned. If we were to take the historic average and look at the end of the century, this is what we'd look at. If we take the good, best possible climate change models that we have right now for how things are going to look at the end of the century, this is going to be most likely our areas and acres burned. And the worst case scenario, and something I don't think we can either afford or ever want to see, is if climate change does play out the way the latest climate models have predicted, we're in for significant additional fires in the state, which means we have to increase and be more responsive as we go along. So that's my presentation. Happy to answer any questions at the end. And if you want to stay in contact, I'd love to chat or email or give you any information you might need. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I don't know how it is with you guys. I think this is completely breathtaking. We met in a cold and damp Iceland last year, and I was then determined to bring you here to Sweden and to Gotland to talk about the fires, because I think your story put our firefighting in a complete different perspective. Thank you. I will come back to you. So please, and I welcome Jakob Wernerman up on stage from the Swedish Civil Contingency Agency. What do you think about this, Jakob?
I agree with you. It's breathtaking. I think what we're seeing from your presentation and from the situation in California is at a completely different scale than what we're used to here. And I think even the numbers, we're sitting here whispering also the numbers. I mean, Peter, how many firefighters do we have in all of Sweden? 12,000 professional firefighters, more or less. And we're talking hundreds of thousands just in the state of California working on these fires. So I think we're looking at a threat and a risk at a different scale than what we have in Sweden. That being said, I think from our perspective, we have a lot to learn from how you are managing this situation. So my name is Jakob Wernerman. I'm the head of the operations section at MSB, and I was also working as the head of the National Emergency Task Force for the big forest fires in Sweden last summer. And I've also been heading an internal project within MSB to strengthen the national level preparedness for forest fires ahead of this summer. And I think building a little bit on what you were talking about, Jonathan, the changing climate and a lot of other factors is also creating a new reality for us here in Sweden. And even though I'm not going to say that last summer's situation is going to be the new norm, I think we need to take it very seriously, and we need to face the fact that we're entering into a new reality when it comes to the risks and the threat of wild and forest fires. Building on the experiences, I'm just going to do a very brief summary of building on some of the key experiences that we had from last summer. And what we've taken into consideration, building the level of preparedness and readiness within the system ahead of this summer. And one of the foremost aspects, which obviously you're talking about as well, is the importance of early detection and early action when it comes to the fires. I did think it was very interesting. I hope we can come back to that. What you were saying, the firefighting in the immediate sense is not the highest priority, but evacuation of people and so forth. So obviously, that's due to the rapid spread of the fires. Forest fires in Sweden, we think that the fires this summer spread very rapidly. It's nothing compared to the spread, the speed of the spreading that you guys are seeing. So for us, a very important aspect is to make sure that we detect the fire early and that we take care of the firefight at a very early stage with enough resources to make sure that the fire does not grow big. So what we have done since last summer is basically that we have complemented at the national level resources, in terms of aerial forest fire fighting resources, in terms of helicopters, that could be utilized as a support to the ground operations that an incident commander could call upon to complement the ground operations, so that you can combine the aerial forest firefighting with the ground forest firefighting to make sure that you can take out a fire at an early stage. This is particularly effective, obviously, when we have fires in difficult terrains. And these helicopters have been utilized now this year. We can pre-position these helicopters based on the fire risk levels around the country. Just last weekend, we had very high levels of fire risk around Sweden. We had 10 helicopters pre-positioned in different locations around the country. And they can be called upon within 90 minutes due to the or that's what it says in the agreement, but they're often responding within, or taking off within 10 minutes from the call, and can be on site depending obviously on how far they have to fly. And this had made a real difference, as reported from local incident commanders, in managing a number of the fires that we've been seeing in the terrain so far this year. And I think it's very important that when we talk about these fires and when we talk about these helicopters and these fires, it's not so much a matter of the resources, but it's really a matter of shifting the focus and shifting the type of tactics that we're utilizing to make sure that we follow the kind of strategy of striking fast and hard on these fires. The second important thing is the importance of scaling up rescue operations when we see these type of fires, and that we make sure that we are ahead of the curve in the development of these fires, and that we're not constantly running behind the ball and trying to catch up, but that we can identify the risk level of the current situation and scale up the operation in time. To do so, you need to have the structures. There's a lot of discussions in Sweden now about system management and local solitary rescue service organization needing to join into larger scale system management in terms of command and control. We feel that's very important. But also to make sure that you can scale up this, there needs to be an enhanced level of collaboration and coordination. And obviously we need to make sure that there is enough equipment. Something we saw last summer towards the peak of the forest fire situation is that we were running out of equipment. We were running out of hoses, we were running out of different types of apparatus. What we've done at MSB is now we've increased the number of forest fire depots that we have pre-positioned throughout the country from 15 to 24. And we also believe that that can make a real difference in terms of making sure that we do not run out of equipment. Thirdly, it's really important, and as we saw for maybe the first time in modern history in Sweden, that we have the capacity to manage simultaneous events, large-scale events. What we had to do last summer is that we had at least 3 simultaneous large-scale events and very high risk levels throughout the rest of the country. And we were in a situation where we had to do very hard prioritization of resources between these different events. This doesn't come naturally because we have a decentralized crisis management system in Sweden, and there's no civilian general that can just point with the whole hand of resources going there or there. So this needs to be done in collaboration. And it worked very well and very effectively, this type of collaboration and coordination under the management of MSB last summer. And this is something, these experiences, that we are continuing to build upon to strengthen these types of structures and ahead of this summer. And to that end, both in terms of the importance of scaling up and the importance of making sure that we can manage simultaneous events, I also wanted to press on one collaboration that we also focused a lot on since last summer, ahead of this summer, which is a collaboration with some of the largest rescue service organizations in Sweden, in Stockholm, in Gothenburg, and in Malmö, to make sure that we pre-identify individuals that can support in terms of command and control to local rescue service organizations in a very quick manner, and that could be brokered and coordinated by MSB if there's a need to scale up or if there's a need to build a new command and control structure because the old one has maybe collapsed and so forth. This type of command and control can also be utilized to strengthen MSB in the coordination of prioritization of resources and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you, Jakob. It's interesting to see all the various actions that MSB has taken to prepare us for the 2019's wildfires better than we were prepared 2018. Please take a seat. And now we've been as we often do, talking about how to deal with wildfires when they occurred. I will now welcome Johan Sonesson up on stage. You are senior scientist in the Forestry Research Institute of Sweden. Is it correct to say that you in a way represents the research and development for the forest industry? The forest industry has always been a basic, very vital industry in Sweden. But now when we are discussing wildfires, we don't hear that much from you, from your side. How come? Please, take us along.
Well, I have no good answer to the last question there, how come? But I still feel that forestry is confident in that we can solve this kind of new situation that we think we are facing with climate change. In Sweden, we have a long history of managing forest fires, of suppressing them. The extreme year last year, about 1 per mil of the Swedish forest land burnt. A normal year 200 years ago, a normal year 1% burnt. And for about 150 years ago, when the forest industry was getting important in Sweden, we started suppressing fire. And even 100 years ago, we were quite effective. Even without roads and helicopters and machines. But at that time we had a lot of people living in the forest, working there, and they probably knew what to do. Today forestry is of course concerned about this. This is large economic values for the forest owners in the areas that burn, and there has been since the large forest fires 5 years ago in Västmanland, which was ignited by a forest machine. There has been a work in forestry to establish common guidelines to prevent forest machines or forest operations to ignite fires, and it's about moving machines, moving logging to areas where the risk is lower. Maybe do the logging in night instead of in daylight or daytime when it's drier. About having people watching the areas during operations and after operations, and things like that. And we think this has been last year quite efficient. Last year, of all the ignitions of forest fires, it was several thousand last years. It was less than 1% that was ignited by forest machinery. Most of it is ignited by people that are careless with fires, with outdoor people, barbecues, smokers, children playing with fire. That's very common ignitions. I also think, I think forestry is quite confident with that we are facing a new future, but if we kind of step up the efforts together and with the resources, better coordination between the fire brigades, authorities, landowners, forestry, we should be able to manage this, but we have to learn how to do it and do it in a better way. I also think when I look on your presentation here, Jonathan, and there's of course there's a difference in climate and vegetation between Sweden is in the boreal zone, and you have a Mediterranean climate in California. And in a Mediterranean climate, we have large wildfires down in the Mediterranean area in Spain and Italy and Portugal. And there you have a green season and a brown season. You have the winter when it's cold and rains, and the vegetation grows, and you have the summer when the vegetation is closing down and getting dry and very susceptible to fires, and also different species that are adapted to drought. In Sweden we have a white season when nothing grows and nothing burns, and we have a green season right now when everything grows and sometimes burns when the weather is extreme. And most of the vegetation that is green doesn't burn, like herbs and grasses and broadleaf trees doesn't burn. And what's normally burns in a Swedish forest, in a forest fire, is the ground layer of mosses and lichens. Mosses and lichens get all their water from the rain. They don't have roots like other plants. So they dry out after a week of dry weather. They dry out so that they can start a fire if the weather is warm and dry enough. And if it's then comes some wind, we get a fire that is normal for Fennoscandian conditions is a ground fire. It burns on the ground, more rarely into the trees, but under extreme circumstances it can also go into the canopies of the conifer trees that can burn. So there are differences in and of course that makes differences in fire intensity, as we saw on your movies here, that are really almost scary. I think that was. I have a figure here. We made at our institute made an inquiry among the forest companies, and last year when the fire risk was high, and all these precautions that was made by forestry, like stopping logging, moving machines, fire guards, these kind of things, costed the forestry, the landowners, about 500 million Swedish crowns last year to prevent forest fires.
Thank you. Listening to some of the seminars here in Almedalen, they are talking about changing the way of doing forestry plantation, because they want to put more into birches and that kind of trees. Can you comment upon that? Because it has been a change from one rule to another, so I'd say.
Well, the Swedish forest is, almost all Swedish forest is managed forest today. And forest industry likes pine and spruce. They are valuable trees, and our industry is built for those trees. We have some broadleaves in the Swedish forest, mainly birches, aspen, alders, and they can't support a canopy fire. There's too much water in the leaves, but the conifer trees, pines and spruces, can support a canopy fire when it gets extreme. And then there's voices raised that we should have more broadleaves in our forests, and that's a possibility. We are getting more broadleaves in our forests. We have 18% right now, and it's increasing. And one reason why it is increasing is because most of the Swedish forestry are environmentally certified, and the certification schemes regulate that you should have a certain amount of broadleaves and broadleaves dominated stands in the landscape. So things are changing, but forests are changing very slow. They grow slow in our cold climate. So I think in a short term there is the best things that forestry can do is to prevent fires from starting, and also cooperate when it happens. Cooperate with you guys. I would say one thing that forestry has done is that forestry provide a very good infrastructure for you guys to quickly get out in the forest and put the fires out, because since the last 70 to 80 years, forestry has built a network of forest roads that are built only for the extraction of timber from the forest. And without those roads, you wouldn't get there quick enough.
So, thank you very much. I welcome all the participants up on stage, and also our fire chief, Peter Arnevall. Please grab a microphone. We'll sort out the name tags. So I start with you, Peter. What's your reflection upon this? Is it something that we are capable of dealing with in Storstockholms brandförsvar, Greater Stockholm Fire Brigade?
Yeah, of course. With our 500 firefighters, we can. Yeah. Now, it's a stark reminder of the different scale that is in California. It's uncomparable to Sweden. It's on a total different scale, and from that, Sweden needs to be better to learn from California, Spain, France, and how to managing these types of wildfires, especially since we in Sweden use wet tactics with hoses and helicopters and put water on them, while you use a more dry tactic and with bulldozers and moving people away. So we can learn a lot. Hopefully, we have quite a few years before we see those types of fires in Sweden. Hopefully, I'm retired then.
I will be, of course, retired. He always brings this subject up. Listening to you, Cal Fire, that's Californian firefighters. It's a state organization. Listening to you, Jakob, you're talking about capability now that is nationwide, and we are preparing our means to support the local firefighters. Are we closing in to a point where we should build a state organization instead? Shall we leave the municipal organization for the best way of dealing with this kind of wildfires, or even civil defense that we talked about this morning? What do you think about the subject? Peter and Jakob first.
Well, the Swedish crisis management is really decentralized, with a lot of responsibility on the local level, and we have a possibility of being better on collaborating on the local level. But we need the support from state and government in a way that we haven't seen before, not just regarding wildfires, but civil defense and floods and storms and whatever. And we can utilize the knowledge from the private sector way much better than we do today.
Jakob?
I would say, to answer your question, no, I'm not convinced. I think we have a very particular strength in the decentralized system in terms of how we manage things and so forth. However, we need to recognize that what we saw in Sweden last summer and so forth, these are extreme events, and it's not realistic to expect that each municipality has the preparedness for the most extreme 100-year type of event. However, many municipalities need to strengthen, they need to invest more in their preparedness, more in their rescue service capacity, and so forth, to be able to cope with similar situations, and taking the changing climate, for instance, into account when they build that preparedness. But we also need to build a joint collaboration and joint preparedness for the most extreme events. And I think forest fires and large-scale forest fires is a good example of where it's not necessarily cost-efficient for our society to build that capacity in each and every municipality, but let's build it together. So I think maybe not all the way, but I think I would encourage more collaboration at the national level. And I also want to mention here the international collaboration, which we're also very much active in from Sweden within the European context. I think it's very important to manage the large, unlikely but high impact events.
Jonathan, you were showing one of your slides here, horrifying future. Where will you be, California firefighters, be in 5 years? What do you think, really?
I wish I had a crystal ball to see where that's going to be. I think the last 2 years have shown us a very unfortunate wake-up call for what the potential future looks like for us. So I think I don't think it's going to get better. I think, if anything, the last 2 years have at least heightened the awareness of our citizens in the state, which will hopefully help us over time to decrease. But unfortunately, there's a lot of factors at play, and we are planning for the worst-case scenario.
What will be the main issue to support higher effectiveness for you in the fire and rescue service? Let's say in 5 years, what will be the main issue for you to focus on?
The ability to scale up real fast, and the ability to receive help from other municipalities, the European context, government agencies. That's a capacity. We have it today, but we need to build it and be able to build it much faster than we do today.
So, thank you. We are coming to the end of the seminar. Are there any questions from these spectators? So, thank you very much for you coming all the way from California to us and to give us this what you call briefing upon your challenges. Thank you, Johan, from coming from the forestry industry, because I think we must listen to your voice more, because it's in your area that we are really acting. And I think we will give them a short applause. So, and my final conclusion will be watching your movie. Thank God for rainy Swedish midsummer. Thank you very much.